Welcome to Get Organized at Work. I'm your host, Fahey-Ahrndt, healthcare leader, mom of three, and your go-to guide for ditching the chaos and taking control of your workday. This is the show where we turn overwhelming to-do lists into clear, actionable plans so you can crush your goals and show up as your best self at work and in your life. Whether you're here for strategies to stay ahead or systems to simplify your workday, you're in the right place. Let's get organized, have some fun, and make this year your best year in your career yet. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back or welcome to Get Organized at Work. I'm Kayla. I'm your host, and I cannot believe it's 2025. We're going to be getting organized at work for 2025 in this episode. It's the second episode of a 3-part series. Last week, we talked about getting our daily work, recurring things, things we want to delegate, projects, things we need to spend time on our calendar, and just getting ourselves organized in the day-to-day so no task gets left behind. This week, we're going to be talking about project management and organizing your projects. Next week, we're going to be talking about optimizing your communication process so you can communicate effectively, communicate down, sideways, and up to your leader to make sure you're communicating your value. So this helps with being seen as a trustworthy, high-performing professional, and it doesn't hurt when it comes to promotions and performance reviews. So I'm excited to get into that. Before we do, I want to remind you about our free podcast community. A bunch of people have already signed up since last week, but if you are craving networking and community, meeting other professionals, people that are learning about time management, career organizing, all of the things that we talk about on this podcast, productivity, trying not to burn out, preventing that, creating sustainable systems. The community is for you. So I have all my free resources. They're being migrated over there. I have a free download that's already in there. It's 30 plus 5 ways to get organized at work in the new year. So that's ready to go for you. You'll get early access to things like podcasts. I will be sharing things that are coming out down the pipeline with that group before anywhere else. So hint, there's stuff coming in the new year, but other than that, it's just a fun way to connect with me and continue the conversation beyond the podcast, right? On this podcast, I just talk to you, but I want to talk with you in a conversation. So join us over there. The link is in the description if you're watching on YouTube, or in the show notes if you're watching on the podcast apps. Let's get down to the episode. And then later on at the end, if you want to stick around, I'll share kind of how my 2025 started, which was a little bit funny. Nothing too crazy, but I thought it was a cute story. So yeah, hang out for that. But let's get started. Let's dive into organizing your projects. So are your projects piling up with no clear direction? Most leaders struggle to keep track of what needs to be done, when it has to be done, and how it's going to get done. So in today's episode, I'm giving you tools and strategies to organize your projects, prioritize them, and communicate their progress effectively. When we do this, we lead with confidence. We can make a big, huge positive impact, and we can start to see changes implemented that make it easier for our people to do good work, for our patients, for our customers, whoever you are serving. So, like I said, last week we talked about organizing your daily work, your to-dos, building that strong foundation, the habits to check on the things you need to do every day. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to that after this episode. Today is managing projects to drive our results. And next week is highlighting the importance of communication. And all these things are going to tie together to lead to your professional success. So, all right. Step number 1 when it comes to organizing projects. So if you're anything like me, you love to create a vision and be like, okay, what are we going to do this year? And it is an exciting time. I also know there's a reality that there's projects that hang out from year to year. And so there's probably also things from 2024 that you need to deal with in this current year. So just like we talked about last week with our tasks and to-dos, I want to make sure that we don't miss anything that is a potential project that should be on our radar. Whether you're a leader leading other people who are doing this work, or these are projects that you personally need to be doing or driving, doing with other people, collaborating on a team. So we do want to start with brain dumping. So writing all the projects, ideas, and tasks that are floating in your head using OneNote, or you can use a spreadsheet. You can even use sticky notes or Post-it notes. I do find this is okay when it comes to projects. You can get color coded, like certain themed projects are blue and others are green. It doesn't really matter at this point. You just need everything written down in one place. But I love using OneNote because it's then there and I can move things around. The other thing you want to do to collect potential ideas for projects is observing where there's inefficiencies or gaps in your organization or team. So you can do this just throughout the year, watching, observing, listening to things people say like, oh, I wish this, or it would be so much easier if this. Another really good question you can ask your team members or other people that you work with to determine projects, ideas is something like, what do you think the biggest risk we have for us is today? And I've asked this question before and it gives you shocking results because a lot of times, based on your perspective, you have a view of what you think is risky or a risk area, and other people have different views. And that's going to, give you a good idea list going like, okay, well, some people think this is a big problem. Do we need to fix it? Is this an area of improvement? So again, gathering input from your team or other stakeholders that you work with, groups that you coordinate with, customers, consumers, to identify areas for improvement. So additional questions you could ask would be like, what's not working or what's working well that we need to sustain? What can we build on top of? Is there a system that is working well, but it could be even better? You can ask what processes feel like kind of outdated or a bit like clunky. There's extra steps. And you can also ask what's holding us back from meeting our goals. So that should give you a pretty big list. Maybe not exhaustive because you'll probably start to think of more things as you listen throughout the year, but a good foundation. Now we know that we can't do every single project that we want to do in 1 year. At least that's true for me. I have probably 20 plus project ideas that are written down that I'm like, these would be great. And so we don't have that many resources, right? So we need to prioritize. One thing that we can do is do a resources versus impact graph. So you all might be kind of familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, which is urgent versus important. This is similar where you're doing resources on one axis and impact on the other. So you want to determine, are there projects that could give us the most significant results with the available resources that we have? So that might fall into like, it's easy or low resources for high impact. It's going to be really helpful for the team. That might be a no-brainer and a just do it project. You might also have projects that are high resource, but also high impact. So the question then this year would be, do we have the resources or is there a way to request resources so we can plan to do this thing? So instead of a just do it, that's more of a we need to plan to do this thing that's going to be high impact, but a lot of resources. You might have ideas that's like low resources, but low impact. So you want to decide, is that really worth doing or is that sort of busy work? Is that going to actually add any value or just take you away from doing other projects that matter? And then you have the other quadrant, high resource, low impact. Then, I don't think you want to do that, right? Like it doesn't make sense. So that's one way that you can prioritize which projects come first, which are just do it's, and which maybe need some planning. You also want to consider the culture of your organization. So things like timing and readiness. Sometimes you have these great ideas. We know we should be doing them, but the organization just isn't ready. There's a piece of the culture or a system that doesn't exist that is coming or should be coming, but we don't have it today. And that makes us not ready. Or maybe the current workload is too high and we're not able to take on that project with the current workload because resources are thin. So let me give you an example. I've used this one on my podcast before. In my work, we've done major computer upgrades and go lives. In years where we do those, the resources on our IT team and our operations teams are stretched. So it doesn't really make sense for us to do other high impact, high resource projects those years. It's unfortunate because those upgrades take a lot of time and energy, but that is the project that is high resource, high impact. So it makes sense to focus just on that thing. So you might just not have the workload or the readiness or the timing for the project, and that's okay. Keep a list of these projects so you don't forget about them, and think about maybe there's another time that might be good next year. Keep it on your list. The other factor you want to consider when prioritizing the project is support. So you want to ensure that leadership and team buy-in are there before you move forward. It can be really hard to try to be pushing a project forward that you think is going to be super beneficial, but you have no buy-in from the people who are actually executing the work. Or maybe you need resources and ways to escalate barriers when you come upon, issues during the project. But if you don't have leadership support, they're not going to be able to help you during the project. When it comes to using a visual aid for prioritizing projects, I love using what's called a project roadmap. I'm sure this existed before me, but this is something that I guess is what I like to call my project list throughout the year is the roadmap. Essentially, it's in my current Leader Standard workbook that's linked on my website and in my show notes if you want to grab it, but it's just a grid. You could make it in Excel, PowerPoint, Word, wherever. And I have all the projects we're going to do on the left-hand side, and across the top are the months of the year. And then when we're going to be working on which project, I'll put X's in those month boxes. So let's say project number 1, we're going to be working on January through April. X's mean that we're planning to do work during that time. Then once January is over, if we worked on that project during that month, I change the X to a check mark and kind of show the progress of the project. And this is a great way to show when there's work being done on multiple projects, when they're overlapping. I'll even include who's most accountable or responsible for getting the work done so that I know, okay, if I'm leading a team or if I'm on a team, then, Kayla has 2 projects. I have 1 project. Maybe I have more capacity to help Kayla, or I have 3 projects. Kayla has 2. Maybe I could ask her to help me, right? Like we all support each other on a team. And this is a way for us to know what we have going on. It's also a great way to track timelines. So it's like, okay, so we're in July. Are we where we hoped we would be? Have we started working on these projects? Are we complete? Were we able to put in the work the last few months? It also is a great place to note high level milestones and priorities. So I always put go lives in there. I always put dates where we want to have like certain things complete. Like maybe the budget needs to be done in this month and the design is done in this month. Construction is in this month, right? So it's just a nice visual that you can share on your team. I like to have one for my team that we look at monthly, and just each person who owns the project will go and give their update on where we're at. And that way people can ask for support, or we can catch ball on ideas. We can change the deadlines if we need to. We can mark things complete at the same time. It's just a great way to visually keep the team updated. Now, some other tools for organizing projects are Gantt charts. I love using Gantt charts. It's just a visual timeline that has your dependencies and your milestones. So a Gantt chart, you can think of it, if I were to describe it to you, since we're listening here, it's basically a way to show what's happening over time. So from left to right, I would have like the beginning of the project, let's say January, all the way to, let's say, October. At the top, let's say I'll just have the months of the year all the way on the top, kind of like our project roadmap. And then let's say training is going to be one thing that needs to get done, and then the go live is the other thing that needs to get done. There'd be 2 rectangular bars. So training might be, let's say it's July to August. And so I'd have a bar that spans July to August. Underneath that, the go live, if go live is October, I'd have October through like the next 2 weeks in October or like November to support that go live. So it's just a nice way to show like what's overlapping, sort of like our project roadmap, and that like, okay, these things come first, these things come second. And a Gantt chart is really used for one project to show the progression throughout the whole timeline of the project. I also really like it because you can create color coding systems and show like, okay, this work's being done by this team, this work's being done by this other team. You can actually create Gantt charts in Excel. So it's not the prettiest way, but it's the cheapest way. And it's easy to do. I will link in the show notes a YouTube video that I found. That's how I learned how to do it. You literally just make a list of the things that need to get done, and you make a bar graph and you delete some of it and you keep some of it. So it's pretty easy to do, down and dirty, quick way to make a Gantt chart. The second thing that I love to do when determining the scope of a project is something called A3 thinking. A3 is just the size of a piece of paper. It's like 11 and a half by 17 inches or something like that. It's a large piece of paper, and it is a lean way, it's a lean method of problem solving and project management. And what lean thinking really focuses on is defining the current state. So if you don't know the current state of whatever you're trying to improve or change, then it's really hard to improve on it, because how do you know if you've made it better if you don't know what it is today? So part of project management, my favorite part really, is understanding like what's actually happening today. And this part I love because you kind of strip down all of the drama, and it's just like legitimately what's happening today. What do we know today? And then where do we want to go in the future? And so this second place, this point A to B, B would be your ideal future state. So if you think of A as the current state, B as the ideal future state, there's space in between that. And that's what's called the gap. And so you want to identify countermeasures, things you can do that will help you close the gap from current to future state. And so this is really where you want to identify root causes and try to knock those down and be like, okay, how can we build in sustainable fixes so that we can live in that future state? So I love doing A3 thinking. It's maybe the most critical piece because, like I said, without knowing your future state, like where you want to go, and without knowing what actually is happening today, it's very hard to make progress and understand and track it. The third tool for organizing projects is just tracking your progress. Check progress statuses monthly using the roadmap or a tracking system like the Gantt charts, setting clear milestones and deadlines to keep things moving forward. The biggest thing you can do is just keep checking the timeline. If you know it needs to get done when, it's best to consistently check up on it. I feel like where most projects fall apart is when we get lax and we're just like, yeah, things are happening, and we don't really look at the plan. And then all of a sudden, a couple months, even a couple weeks go by, and we haven't looked at the plan. And we're like, oh, we were supposed to get that thing done last week so that this week we can do this thing. So if you have dependencies where something has to come before something else, you really need to stay on top of checking those project statuses. If you're lucky, you'll get a project manager assigned to your project to help you with this. But a lot of times as leaders, professionals, as managers, we become the project managers, which is why I'm teaching you these skills. So some tips would be to put a meeting on the calendar once a month, once a week, to do these check-ins. It could be just a meeting with yourself, like a reminder, like I'm going to go check the project plan. It could be regularly checking the roadmap with the team at a monthly cadence. So you decide and communicate that out, and that will help you feel comfortable whenever you might be asked on the status. Your goal is to never be caught off guard and to always know what's going on without having to micromanage every piece. All right. And so we're getting towards the end here. I just want to talk about communicating progress and measuring success, and then I'll recap the key takeaways. So communicating with stakeholders, I feel, is one of the most important pieces of project management, because if you had to get approval to do this project, if you have to justify this project, if it's getting high visibility in the organization, if it's something you're hoping to make a big impact, you want to make sure that you share updates with the right people at the right time. And you want to make sure that you communicate in a clear way, in a concise way that makes sense so that everybody doing the project, everybody responsible for supporting the project is aligned and on the same page. I don't want to say it's the worst thing that can happen to you, but one of the things that I strive for is to never get a question from my VP, like, where are we at with this? I always want them to know without them having to ask me. That might be like kind of crazy, but when I was doing our computer upgrade, I wanted that person to be on our stakeholder meetings. I wanted that person to get the right emails. I wanted that person to get the updates from me so that they could hear it from my mouth before hearing it sideways. So as a leader, as a proactive professional, this is one thing you can really focus on to show your boss that you are really on top of things and that you know what's going on and you're supporting the project and they're not really having to do anything. It makes it easy for them. So next week, we'll talk about how to communicate easily and regularly so that you get that support and know that they can see that the value that you are adding. The second thing for communicating and measuring progress is measuring what are called KPIs or key performance indicators. So you want to track KPIs to assess whether the project has achieved its goals, and you want to use the data to refine processes, improve future processes or projects, sustain the changes that you've made. So you want to think of what can we measure that will show if we're getting the outcome that we're hoping to achieve. If we're getting that outcome of being in future state and things are working as expected. So with our computer go live, it might be the number of patient specimens on our pending log. It might be the number of phone calls we're getting. It might be patient safety events. Let's say you're migrating into a new website. You maybe want to make sure like, oh, I'm seeing page views. I'm seeing that we're ranking for different search terms or our SEO is optimized. I don't know. I'm just making these up on the fly. So if you're doing a change, you want to be able to measure it. So are there quantitative measures, metrics that can be pulled with data, or are there also qualitative measures? Can you simply survey the team members and say, does it feel like we're meeting our goals? Do you feel good? Does this change help you? Do we have barriers that we need to tweak, refine, and improve as we go on? This is super important. You don't want to just do the project and then end and be like, it's good without knowing if what you did is working. You always want the opportunity to maybe back off of the project, revert, or improve before just moving on. You never want to leave something in a mess. All right, so let's just quickly wrap up. I want to recap the key takeaways. So, of course, doing the brain dump, that helps to identify opportunities for improvement, but also seeking advice and ideas from others, asking those really specific questions. What's going well? What's not going well? What are our biggest risk areas? What would you like to see us do this year? Prioritize projects based on resources, impact, timing, readiness, culture, support, etc. Use tools like Gantt charts, A3 thinking, and project roadmaps to stay organized, on top of things, know where you're at, and communicate progress effectively and measure success with those key performance indicators or KPIs. So simple, right? I know that projects get really, they can get really messy, they can get really big, and these are lots of skills that you have to learn over time. And you might not have experience with project management until you're thrown into it. I've definitely been thrown into projects many times where now I feel like I know what to ask, but my first time, no idea. So I love teaching on this. I'll definitely go more into depth in this during the year. So if there's something specific you want to hear from me, definitely comment on the podcast. I think if you're listening in Podbean, you can leave a comment. Same thing in Spotify. You can also email me at kayla@kfaconsulting.org. Or join our free podcast community. You can comment on our wall and let me know what you liked about this episode, what you'd like to hear more about in terms of project management. Maybe you are looking for the project roadmap and I can share that more in the group. So next episode will be communicating your work and results to your boss for maximum recognition. So definitely check that out and I will see you back here next week. Thanks everyone. Take care.